Before we start, please make sure to subscribe to our channel to get more videos like this one. For more related video, especially a preparation like this one, check the description box below. Now let's start.
Impeccability. If something is worth doing, then it's worth doing right. At West Point, time was so very, very important because you had so little of it at your disposal. Plebes also had to memorize all 3 of the meals for the day and who the officer in charge was for that day. Some cadets were charged with delivering all the mail, others delivered all the laundry. Some plebes called out the minutes before formations so that upperclassmen would know when to be ready and what to wear. Everyone had a task, believe me. Think about this for a minute, if you will. Every day, 4,000 cadets ate breakfast in 15 to 20 minutes. Each table had 2 or 3 plebes at the end to serve all of the upperclassmen. And as plebes, we had to know each upperclassman's preferences, from what kind of food they preferred to the number of ice cubes they wanted in their iced tea, which might vary from the number of ice cubes they wanted in their Coke. If there was a dessert at dinner that required cutting, such as cake or pie, we were required to cut it into identically sized pieces, using up the entire pie. You try to do that when only 7 people want pie. 7 pieces, exactly the same size, with no crumbs left on the top of the cake and none left in the pan. By the way, for cakes with icing, using a protractor and a cold iced knife is the best way to do it. I know from experience, it was high art for a plebe. As Niels Bohr said, an expert is a man who has made all the mistakes which can be made in a very narrow field. Varsity athletes at West Point sat at core squad tables, which was preferential seating, if you will, so they didn't have undue stress during meals. They were also allowed to eat as much as they wanted so they could compete effectively on the playing field. But for the rest of us plebes, at meals we sat straight up, the table a fist distance from our stomach, and the chair back a fist distance from our spine. Our eyes stayed fixed on the crest on our plates. When we took a bite, it did not exceed the size of anything that would require us to chew more than 2 times and swallow after we were addressed. We had to respond without food in our mouths. Under these constraints, it was usually pretty hard to get a full meal in. Everything about our days included massive memorization of minutiae and attention to the tiniest details. Much of it seemed crazy at the time, but the training would serve us well as soldiers. After I graduated from West Point, I completed my military intelligence officer basic course and earned my Ranger tab, which I'll discuss in more detail later. I then reported to my first unit, 2nd Brigade, 7th Infantry Division Light at Fort Ord, California. I was the Assistant Intelligence Officer for an infantry brigade of 1,500 soldiers. A brigade is the primary fighting force unit, which is further broken down into battalions, then companies, and finally platoons and squads. There were 3 brigades in the 7th Infantry Division, and each brigade rotated through monthly turns serving on a 2-hour recall as a rapid deployment force. That meant that every soldier on call had to be standing in formation, ready to move out within 2 hours of an alert going out. As an infantry brigade, we had support from field artillery, military intelligence, air defense artillery, and other supporting elements. As a light infantry brigade, we were basically troops on foot, without armor protection, though we did have Humvees. As the assistant S2, I was responsible for supporting the S2 and filling in for him when he was gone. I worked with then-Captain Andrew Hergenrother, who later appeared on The Apprentice to say some very nice things about me to Donald Trump. I was humbled to hear his remarks because this man had amazing attention to detail, plus incredible passion for his job. Captain Hergenrother was a great leader. He embodied the Army's principles of leadership. He had been an enlisted soldier before completing officer candidate school, so he had significant experience in the military at every level. Every one of the 10 principles I discuss in this book was second nature to him. He honed them every day and hammered them into me and the other soldiers as we worked together. As the old Chinese proverb says, skill comes from practice. The brigade commander was Colonel Linwood E. Birney, who was the ranking surviving officer from Hamburger Hill in Vietnam. He impressed upon me, the entire brigade, and pretty much everyone he came in contact with, that soldiering was not just a job. We were not training merely to learn how to shoot things. We were going into combat together, where all of us would depend on each other. Anybody who screwed up or didn't carry their weight would seriously jeopardize soldiers' lives. Colonel Birney was very serious about our mission of being ready to go to war. We've all heard the saying, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. In combat, a bad first impression equals death. I never met another soldier who had quite that level of intensity and focus. He was an awesome and inspiring motivator. In turn, His soldiers got things done for him. The level of intensity was maintained at all times during our training program. Everything we did, we were doing for a serious reason. No fun and games, lollygagging, or daydreaming about an upcoming 3-day pass. Our mindset was, we are professional soldiers, and we are going to war. We must be ready. Once we're in a war, it's too late to train and try to figure out what's going on. All of our training exercises met Colonel Birney's exacting standards of impeccability. He tolerated nothing less. And because of that, if you'd ask any soldier who they'd want commanding them in combat, the answer was always Colonel Birney. After I left the Army, I entered UCLA Law School with the intent of becoming a corporate attorney. At West Point, I had completed a summer internship with the House Armed Services Committee in Washington, D.C. Because of my top-secret security clearance, I was able to sit in on the markup hearings of bills and see how laws in this country are really made. This experience certainly planted the seed for my interest in both business and the law. I realized how true Calvin Coolidge's famous phrase really is, that the business of America is business. Every legislative decision had to do with jobs, allocating tax dollars generated by the private sector, keeping our economy competitive, and allocating contracts for government business. I researched how to become an effective corporate attorney. Every attorney I talked to said a strong background in business was a big plus. It was the one trait most often lacking in candidates for corporate law firms. I decided that as I studied for my law degree, I would earn an MBA at UCLA's Anderson Business School simultaneously. During my JD MBA program, the first year I only took law classes. The second year I attended the business school, but loaded a couple of law classes onto my workload. At the same time, I got a job working 20 hours a week at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, a prominent national law firm. I worked for Gibson during my second and third years of school. My third and fourth years of study, I combined both law and business classes, graduating with degrees in both at the end of 4 years. I've been told a few times in my life that I like to argue, and the study of law was a great place to practice my arguments. There's nothing like having a law school professor rip your carefully prepared argument to shreds. Law school taught me the importance of impeccable research. If you aren't diligent and perfect in your research when preparing a case, rest assured that opposing counsel will be. If, as a lawyer, you fail to study and commit to memory every last precedent and legal decision with any application to your client's case, you will suffer the ramifications in court in front of the judge. Your client's money, business, or in criminal cases, freedom, depends in large part upon your attention to detail and impeccable research. The whole business versus law debate came to a head one day during my third year of law school. In the course of my 20-hour work week at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, I labored for months on the corporate acquisition of a company worth tens of millions of dollars. My law firm represented the corporation being acquired. When it was finally time to close the deal, a bunch of us had been up all night at the printer finalizing the documents for the purchase agreement. The room was packed with lawyers and accountants and principals from both sides. At 10 a.m., we were all bleary with bloodshot eyes when the owner of the smaller company strolled in with his CFO. They were both big guys from Texas wearing cowboy hats and boots and smoking cigars. The two men took seats at the long wooden table where a partner from Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher was arguing with the acquiring company's lead attorney. The issue was where a comma should be placed in one of the contract's clauses. The CFO turned to the CEO and said, "Can you believe we're paying these sons of bitches $500 an hour to argue about where a comma goes?" I looked at both of the attorneys at the head of the table. Both were highly regarded partners in their respective top-drawer law firms, extremely capable and bright. Both had contributed immeasurably to getting this deal done. But at the moment, they were arguing about a comma. I looked over at the guy in boots smoking a cigar about to make millions on one deal, and the light bulb went on. I wanted to be the client. I wanted to be the person creating companies and building wealth. Everything had suddenly become crystal clear. I didn't want to be a vendor or a consultant or an attorney. I wanted to be the guy running the companies and hiring the lawyers. As President Andrew Johnson said, "Some gentleman says I have been a tailor. That does not disconcert me in the least, for when I was a tailor I had the reputation of being a good one and making close fits. I was always punctual with my customers and always did good work." I was meeting so many talented people at Anderson Business School who were jumping into the business world and starting all kinds of exciting ventures. My entrepreneurial passion grew and grew until my final year, when I wrote a business plan for ImageTel, a video conferencing startup company. My law classes gave me an excellent grounding in learning how laws govern and drive our society. It was a strong underpinning to the rest of my education, and I have used what I learned in law school significantly in terms of regulations, the ins and outs of setting up corporations, and simply understanding the fundamental notion that much of business rests on contracts. My law degree has been tremendously useful in my career, but my heart was in business, specifically in starting and growing companies. Another great story about impeccability is how the company eTeams grew to be the largest amateur sports portal in existence. The eTeams founders, Brian Johnson and Aaron Eisenberg, were 20-something friends who lived in Southern California. Brian got disenchanted with law school at Berkeley, dropped out in the middle of his first year, and returned home. The only thing he knew he wanted to do, besides burn his resume, was coach a Little League baseball team, so he volunteered. Unfortunately, although a good athlete in his playing days, Brian's team looked like the Bad News Bears, and the kids' morale dropped with every loss. Brian wanted these kids to have a better experience. He thought there should be a way for talented, passionate, successful coaches to share their knowledge with volunteer coaches and kids. That started Brian thinking, what can we do to provide that information? He collaborated with his friend Aaron, an internet developer, and together they created a system to track schedules, standings, rosters, directions to the game, even who was in charge of cookies that week for various leagues and teams. A separate section of the website was designed to make available tips, drills, and instructions in any sport. Anyone who became coach of a t-ball team could go to their website and get direction on everything from lists of necessary equipment to how to set up a practice. Brian reached out to webmasters trying to develop websites for their sports teams. He asked them every question he could think of. What's the hardest thing about coaching your team? What information is most important for your website? What would you like to see done better? What information would most help your team? What information would most help the kids' parents? Brian and Aaron did an unbelievably thorough job of product assessment, talking with future customers about what the product should be. From those hundreds of discussions with coaches and parents, they created their product, a website called eTeams. Pretty soon they had about 700 or 800 baseball teams using their site and contributing tips and drills. It was mostly about baseball to start, though it was clear that this was a model that could easily be applied to every amateur sport across the board: football, bowling, horseshoes, you name it. Gary Winehouse, who served as eTeams' VP of Operations, was also attending the Anderson Business School at UCLA. He suggested putting the eTeams business plan into the business school's annual competition. The eTeams concept won. I learned about the project through my business school alumni network and was immediately drawn in. At this point, I had been through one failed entrepreneurial venture and been hard at work at Deloitte Consulting for 2 years in a regular salary job trying to recover from my financial losses at ImageTel. I was eager to get back into the entrepreneurial startup mode, and the eTeams idea and team got me fired up enough to leave my so-called secure position at Deloitte Consulting. eTeams was a perfect combination of so many things I personally am passionate about: team sports, kids, and growing a business. The challenge was turning this great idea into a profitable company. This was at the height of the internet craze, so we focused on trying to capture all the eyeballs we get on our site, create loyalty, and worry about profits later. In the internet boom days, that was the plan. Very few people anticipated the bubble would burst and the money faucet would be shut off. We recruited Anderson graduates and interns from the summer program to work with us at eTeams. We did a great job of the entrepreneurial basics, networking and utilizing our resources. After we won the business plan competition, we were able to attract $1 million from the Tech Coast Angels, an investment group that specializes in startup technology companies. That capital allowed us to make critical hires, including experts in various sports, so that we could provide credible content in each of our most popular sports communities. We spent the next year acquiring online companies who had traction in various sports, with the goal of getting plenty of expertise in-house. There might be a guy in Iowa who had the best website on being an offensive lineman on a football team. We'd give him an eTeams hat and a set of business cards and say, "You don't have to worry about the technology anymore. Come be our expert on offensive line drills, tips, and instruction on eTeams. Your name will be up in lights and there's no more technology hassle." Users could go on the site and see little Johnny smiling as he ran into home plate, and we provided a guest book where Aunt Edna in Ohio could post, "Great job, Johnny. Sorry we couldn't be at the game." The networking effect was simply phenomenal. For example, we had 12-year-old girls' soccer teams in Europe all signing each other's guest books, teams from Germany, France, and England. The girls actually set up a summer tour based on their communications on eTeams, traveling to play each other. eTeams changed the amateur sports world. It allowed people to focus on what they love doing, the sports, instead of worrying about organization, technology, and communication. Because of Brian's focus on an impeccable product, in less than 2 years, eTeam became the third most trafficked sports website. After a year, eTeams had 50,000 softball tournaments listed on the site. The only 2 sports websites that showed more traffic than eTeams were CBS Sportsline and ESPN. We had more traffic than the PGA Tour and NASCAR. It's easy to see why we grew the way we did. There are usually 10 to 20 kids on a Little League team, and most of them play more than one sport. They had brothers and sisters who play other sports, and mom and dad might be in a bowling league. We created so many mechanisms to fuel growth that today, as this book goes to press, There are more than 2.5 million teams using the eTeams website, which encompasses every sport in every country in the world. After raising the original $1 million, we raised approximately $4 million more from venture capitalists for further expansion. We had a 23-year-old and a 25-year-old as founders, and only one person in the company was over 40. We were able to recruit the man who had grown Adidas to a $1.6 billion brand. He eventually became my first true business mentor, Steve Wynn, a phenomenal businessman. I learned about unbelievable passion and impeccability from Brian, who was almost 10 years younger than I was and with no formal business background. His dedication to customer satisfaction was absolute and inspiring. Those qualities came through so strongly in the product that eTeams was thought of by its users as an almost religious experience. Our customer service goal was to make sure that anyone who came to the website could find anything they needed instantly. If they were left with a question, we answered it and fixed it immediately. Brian was fond of asking, "When we have 1 million teams, what if each team asked one question?" The answer was, we'd be out of business. So we worked to ensure that the website was laid out correctly right from the start. And it was. The whole idea was to make an impeccable product, and that's why eTeams succeeded. eTeams had two main competitors, My Team out of Boston and Active.com out of San Diego. What was ironic was that My Team actually had the official sponsorship of Little League. My Team had approached the Little League organization and offered to pay to be their official provider of this type of service. But eTeams, founded on offering a product that offered the user a great experience, focused on capturing new teams by outstanding word-of-mouth recommendations. With a little more than $5 million in funding, we were killing My Team on sports teams adoption, especially inside of Little League. As it turned out, in Little League, as in many large organizations, regional volunteers didn't care much for headquarters. Little League teams around the country wanted the best product, and we had it, so they used it. And we constantly adjusted the product on a weekly and monthly basis to provide everything our users wanted. Our other big competitor was Active.com. Active.com had originally provided support for running events. If you wanted to register for a marathon, Active was the site for you. The people who actually managed the Boston Marathon, for example, used Active.com as their administrative tool for everything from online registration, to marketing, to pricing, to scheduling. As a customer or marathon runner or triathlete, I would come to their site to connect to local hotels, pay my admission fee, get my registration papers mailed to my house, and take care of many other details. It streamlined the entire process and was a great tool, but Active.com was eager to grow from individual events, like marathons and triathlons, into team sports. Similarly, during eTeams' first year, we focused mainly on Little League baseball, but we soon targeted the next most popular sports, soccer, football, and others. We wanted to follow the kids from sport to sport to keep our traffic up all year round. So we brought on professional athletes to help us market ourselves to different team sports. And we lived what we worked. Sometimes we'd play pickup basketball after meetings. It was ferociously competitive. Active had very much the same culture, employing triathletes and Ironman competitors. To build a successful product, you have to hire the sort of people who would use it, who would know what it should be and how it could be improved. Brian did the research at the beginning, but fine-tuning a product to achieve maximum customer satisfaction is a continual process. We had gone about our business thinking that money would always be available from fundraising and focused mainly on blowing out the product. There were a couple of revenue generators for eTeams. In order to host a website and have your team listed, it was free up to a certain point based on how much space you took up. With lots of photos, adding video, or utilizing our fundraising tools, packages could be bought for a minimal amount of money per month. To host a website or have a premium version required a modest fee. Advertisers, the Gatorades and Wilsons of the world, were another way to generate revenue. The amateur sporting goods market is a $4 billion a year industry, and what better place to advertise than eTeams? Brian and I bumped heads frequently about when and how best to charge the users and bring in more advertisers. Brian wanted to protect the user experience. He worried that teams wouldn't want to share space with Gatorade ads. I wanted to generate income as quickly as possible and argued that if part of our service was to keep the site free of ads, then he should charge for it, kind of like an HBO. But eTeams was a labor of love for Brian, and we stayed true to his instinct. The creative tension between us contributed to sharpening the product and making eTeams a success. And as Thomas Jefferson said, I find that the harder I work, the more luck I seem to have. When the internet market imploded, My Team and Active.com had each raised $30 to $50 million. We lacked that huge war chest and were not on the same page as our investors about how to proceed. Ultimately, we decided to cut our reliance on investment capital and instead raise money from the site by shifting our traffic to a site that would become the de facto leader in amateur sporting sites. We decided that our best bet, after a lengthy decision-making process, was to pare down from 50 people to a minimum number of employees, 10 or 12, so that we could still manage operations and continue to show growth month to month in our traffic. We terminated almost 40 people over a 3-month period and still continued to sustain our traffic growth rate, even without those employees. At that point, we were then able to approach both my team and Active.com and say, all right, time to bid. We engaged an investment bank to help us in the auction of the company and finally decided that Active.com was the buyer for the business. We had 50,000 tournaments on our site and between 200,000 or 300,000 teams. Our traffic was off the charts. Active.com's ability to take the entire package, do sponsorships, complete transactions, and maintain and develop the drills and tips section combined into a phenomenally feel-good business. We wound up selling eTeams to Active.com for a little more than 2.5 times our invested capital. Keep in mind, this was after the internet bubble burst, when most internet companies were getting bought for pennies on the dollar, if at all, and at that time we were a company with no revenue. But Steve Wynn's insight and planning, along with the proven product and loyal customer base, paid off. Active.com grew rapidly through acquisitions, and suddenly there were a lot of chiefs, all the CEOs from the companies they had acquired. I negotiated a cash bonus for myself to get the sale done, retained a bit of equity, and went on my way. Active.com bought what was left of my team a few months later. Brian stayed on at Active.com for 6 months, but finally decided he wanted to build another business. He is now in the middle of another labor of love called Zods. He wants to be able to provide every mom-and-pop storefront owner with an easy site-building tool that includes built-in comprehensive marketing, commerce, and how to run a business components. He's focused on the personal improvement sector and is looking to do for yoga studios, career coaches, and karate dojos what he did for Little League teams. He wants to reach people who don't have the time or knowledge to develop top-flight business websites. It's another phenomenal idea and service. Brian is a visionary. There are 2 types of entrepreneurs. The first is an industry veteran who sees a problem and goes out to fix it with a new product or service that fixes that problem, and become the expert on that area. They can build the product or service. The other kind of an entrepreneur is the expert at growing a new company, which is what I like to do. I've been a marketing expert, a finance expert, a business developer, a CEO, a COO, and a board member. Through networking, I know how to find the experts every new company needs. Tip: LinkedIn is an online tool that helps me stay in touch or find the right person in my vast network. Brian was the first kind of entrepreneur. The man recognized a market need. His passion was a critical aspect of eTeam's success, and the standard of impeccability he insisted on made the business work. Active.com is still going strong with some of eTeam's original employees. When I check out the website, www.eteams.com, and I see how it's grown to encompass sports I've never heard of, it simply amazes me and I tip my hat to Brian's genius. You can't teach genius, but you can teach impeccability. In the military, officers are taught the necessity of gathering information to make an informed decision, knowing that it's impossible to gather 100% of the information you need. On the battlefield or in business, you have to make decisions with imperfect information all the time. Timing is critical, and every leader must decide when the research ends and the product is launched. Neither a combat leader nor an entrepreneur can afford indecision. One of the skills that sets Donald Trump apart is his ability to make decisions and forge ahead. He's a master at coming up with the right answer from imperfect information. The Apprentice and impeccability. My favorite task on The Apprentice was the Pepsi Challenge, where our team had to create a new bottled drink for the Pepsi-Cola company. I was project manager and got to send one person to the other team. I sent Jen to the other team with Andy and Sandy, which worked out very well. Ivana, Kevin, and I were a well-oiled machine. We set up a plan on the way to Pepsi's headquarters and got that spreadsheet rocking. We had all of our meetings set up by the time we arrived. We walked through the creative process and together came up with what we believed was a fantastic bottle design. It was the word edge turned sideways. Check the box, get the edge was our motto, so we wanted a bottle with an actual hole that went all the way through the letter D in edge. Inside the hole we could put sweepstakes tickets and other prizes and use it as a promotional tool. However, we kept getting told by the engineers that a bottle with a hole would be too difficult to make and mass produce. We stuck to our guns because it was the perfect bottle, and we weren't about to settle for anything less than perfection. Yes, it was hard to do, but we pushed them and we got it done. That bottle won the day. It looked great. We insisted on and won with an impeccable product design. Ross Perot on impeccability. Ross Perot was an outstanding cadet naval officer in the 1950s and eventually became one of our country's most successful entrepreneurs. In high school, I focused on working and learning to be a businessman. I was not preoccupied with being an honor student, even though all my friends were. A turning point in my life occurred one day in high school when a great English teacher named Mrs. Duck asked me to stay after class. She looked me squarely in the eye and said, "Ross, why aren't you smart like all your friends?" My response was, "Mrs. Duck, I am as smart as they are, but they study all the time. I have other interests." She replied, "Ross, talk is cheap. If you're as smart as they are, let me see some results." I took the challenge and studied hard night and day from that point on. On my next report card, I had all A's but one. For the rest of my time in high school, I got excellent grades. Mrs. Duck gave me the incentive to create an academic record that would allow me an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy. She changed my life. A few years later, at the end of my freshman year at the Academy, I had gotten excellent grades in English. I felt a strong obligation to thank Mrs. Duck, so when I arrived home in Texarkana for the summer, I went to her home and personally thanked her. She expressed genuine surprise that I had done so well in English. This was very consistent with her usual way of motivating me. She then said, "Ross, why didn't you just write me a letter?" I replied, "Mrs. Duck, every paper I ever turned into you came back circled with red notes about how I could make it better. I knew I could not write a letter with no mistakes in it, so I thought I would be better off personally thanking you." Without laughing or even smiling, she said, "Ross, you're probably right." She kept the pressure on. I owe her a debt I can never repay. Take command, impeccability. Make sure the first and last impression you make is your best. Maintain impeccable standards for all your work. You never know who is going to see it or what it will be used for. What you deliver and how you deliver it is who you are. Be the best you can be.